Very warm welcome and good morning to everybody who's attending in today's webinar. Happy to have you all on board. My name is Alexander Granzin. I am with PARTSLIFE now for about 10 years. I'm responsible for the part of business development and also for the part of consultancy. So that is the reason why I'm attending in today's webinar. As you can see, we have two major topics today. The first part is LKSG, in German, Lieferkettensorgfaltspflichtengesetz. So a very, very long word. It is related to the German Supply Chain Act. Maybe you have heard about European legislation, which are going in this direction. And today we will jump into the German legislation and we'll look what's included. And the second major topic is the so-called CSRD, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And we will also go deeper into this topic. We will have a guest speaker today, who is Daniel Weiss from Adelphi, or better, Fayont. And so that is a new company. I'm pretty sure Daniel will tell us something more about Fayont later. But before we start, before we go directly into the topics, some organizational things. The meeting will, or the webinar will take place from 10 to 11, so about 1 hour. If you have questions, feel free to ask the questions via the chat. We will answer the questions later after the webinar. Of course, you also have the possibility, each of your company, to set up a meeting with PARTSLIFE after the meeting so that we can go much deeper into the topics of your individual company situation. So I'm happy now to hand over to Daniel. So Daniel, please share your screen and we are happy to see your presentation now.
Yeah, my name is Daniel Weiss. I work for Fayont. It's actually quite a new company. We founded the company at the beginning of this year, 2024. It's part of the Adelphi group. Adelphi is a leading European consultancy, policy consultancy based in Berlin on all matters regarding sustainability. We have close ties to PARTSLIFE and Alexander's team and are working together closely on environmental topics in international value chains, I would say, on various matters. I myself have worked on both topics, the CSRD and LKSG, both on a policy level, I would say, so advising ministries here in Germany, but also working closely with various companies right now at the moment on both regulations and the requirements behind them. I can also share the presentation, or Alexander can share the presentation afterwards with you. So I'll start before I dig deep into the CSRD. Why those two? I mean, there are more regulations either upcoming or already have entered into force, but these two are especially important for companies for various reasons I will talk about in the coming presentation, but it does make a lot of sense to look at them in combination and also try to utilize synergies, which is definitely possible. So we have the CSRD on the left side. I will call it from now on LKSG. It's easier than Lieferkettensorgfaltspflichtengesetz. So the CSRD is defining reporting obligations. That's important to know. There has been something before the CSRD for larger enterprises on a European level, but the CSRD is now, let's say, focusing, sharpening the requirements, expanding the scope. But the main purpose is increased transparency of how companies perform with regard to sustainability, and therefore some reporting obligations have been formulated. On the right side, you have the LKSG, and it does cover at least partly a similar topic, namely human rights and environmental obligations or risks and impacts in international value chains. But it's not only about reporting. I would say the main focus of the LKSG is on establishing a due diligence process or a supply chain management approach that is meeting the requirements of the law. The end product, if you will, is also a report. The different kind report, I will also explain it in more detail, but it's only, I would say, a side product. The main focus here is on processes, whereas the CSRD is focusing on reporting. And I already said the CSRD is in many ways a continuation of what has already been established on the European level with regard to reporting, but it will definitely have a bigger impact now. One of the main reasons is the scope will be bigger, and there are estimates that alone in Germany, the scope of affected companies will be significantly higher, from round and about 500 so far to up to 15,000, which is really a big step. And that is starting actually right now. For some companies, the CSRD is, if you will, active from this year onwards. Others have a more phased-in approach. I will explain this in a few minutes. And the supply chain law on the right side has entered into force at the beginning of last year, 2023. For some companies, I will also talk about that in a few minutes, and for some other companies, depending on some key company figures like a number of employees, turnover, etc., it will come into force this year. And I briefly touched upon the topic of synergies. As I said, it's both cover reporting. Nevertheless, the LKSG has a slightly different focus or broader focus, but they both cover at least partly similar topics: environmental and human rights impacts and risks in international value chains. So you can definitely, when you address the two topics, use information you collect for both reports, if you will. Yeah. We'll start with the CSRD. Before I do that, and I don't want to go into the detail here, but it's always good to remember why do we do it, or why bother? The main, I would say, driving force, and I think PARTSLIFE is also actively promoting and explaining that, is the so-called European Green Deal, which is basically setting some, I would say, overarching objectives, namely with regard to CO2 emission mitigation, so some climate targets, but then also some more underlying objectives and targets with regard to how companies perform with regard to sustainability. I would say by and large, the European Green Deal is so far set. So the major legislation has been passed or is underway. And we will not talk about the entire package here. I've marked in red, you see the bottom line on the left, and then somewhat on the right, the CSRD on the left, and in the middle, it's the so-called CSDDD. It's the European equivalent of the German supply chain law. I will also briefly explain it in a minute, but you see it's all interconnected. It's all part of a larger approach to sustainability and green economy within Europe. You also see, if you see on line 3, Fit for 55 package, from the right, the second box, CBAM. I will at the end, because we received many requests in one slide, briefly touch upon this as well, because it's also involving reporting obligations for companies in your sector and other sectors. So I already said the CSRD is not entirely new. Something else has been there before, also reporting obligations, but for a very limited scope, I would say. As I said, only round and about 500 companies so far in Germany. So the new requirements, I think you can explain it in a list, is You have a broader scope that I already mentioned. So more companies based on number of employees, turnover, and balance sheet will be directly addressed, and also some smaller entities. You have what is also different. You have now, based on European law, clear reporting standards. So there are clear requirements as to how you report. For example, what kind of indicators to use, what kind of unit to report that in. Before the CSRD, you had a reporting obligation, but it was up to your own choosing as to how you do that, which standard you're following. So far, it has been the Global Reporting Initiative. For those who know it, GRI. From now on, it will, eventually, I would say, manifest itself in these European reporting standards. They're called ESRS. I will also talk about them in this presentation in more detail. And you also have, let's say, a more demanding approach to how to define material topics. So what does matter for the company? And it's the so-called double materiality approach. I will also explain it in this presentation. You have also, so where to report, you have the non-financial statement. It needs to be integrated into the group Lagebericht. I have to admit, I don't know the proper English translation, so management or financial report, I would say. You have an electronic format that will become mandatory. The Commission is still, let's say, defining the nitty-gritty of this electronic reporting format. And as I said, and I think the German sentence has slipped into this presentation, you have here overall 50,000 in Europe and round about 15,000 in Germany alone. And you have also a mandatory audit by external auditors that is also mandatory. And something to already take into account is, but I will explain the process, is that this should also be taken aboard. So the view of auditors while setting up the entire reporting system. It doesn't make a lot of sense to make it audit proof, if you will. So the key objectives, why did the European Commission do it? It's mainly standardization and coherence. As I said, you had reporting obligations, smaller size of companies or smaller scope, but then also no clear standard how to report. And this will change, also will increase comparability. Also maybe view that in line with discussions around greenwashing and what does it mean to be green or sustainable? How can I label myself? What is allowed, what is not allowed? And if you have a clear set of reporting standards, obviously that is better for those who adhere to those standards. And there will also be more control and oversight, and obviously also more data points to report on. So on the timeline, as I said, I will send it to you if you want to, or Alexander can pass it on. And I will explain it in the next slide. It's not a process where you have like, okay, this is now 2024. All companies affected need to report immediately. You see the development until, I mean, we're even 2024 now. We are still in a phase where the process will now officially start for those who are have bigger companies or bigger company structures, but several processes are still undergoing. For example, guidance documents are still being developed. As I said, the electronic format is still being discussed. And then you have a phase-in approach for smaller companies. And the entire process will go on for a few years. You have several or different starting points and also entry points for those companies with a smaller size. And what does it mean exactly? So you have a first, I would say, batch of companies who report for this financial year, so for 2024, and you see the criteria. It's basically market-oriented large companies. You see 3 criteria: 500 or more employees, 40 million in turnover, or 20 million in balance sheet total. And those companies we work mainly with or supporting in the CSRD implementation are in the batch in the middle, I would say. So report due in 2026 and financial data from 2025. And you have to meet, or companies meeting 2 out of these 3 listed criteria fall under this category, so more than 250 employees. I think there is a slight typo. It's 50 million turnover and 25 million balance sheet. Sorry, I will correct that in the presentation I sent to you. And this is, in our experience, this is now for most companies the reality. So to prepare for 2025 data and 2026 publication. And then you have some others which will start in 26, 27. You see the criteria here. Some other criteria apply to do that. There are, if you go into detail, I won't do that today, but there are certain opt-out possibilities for companies depending on various criteria like company size, for example. But this is, let's say, the general setting, and I would assume that companies now here in this webinar either fall under category 1 or 2. As I said, most companies we work with under category 2, and they're already, or many of them are already underway or starting now the preparation. So what is it all about? I mentioned the sustainability reporting standards. As I said, it's the first time that the European Commission defines its own reporting standards for relevant sustainability topics. And they have basically set up an entire reporting structure. It has been developed by a group called EFRAG, including experts from auditing companies, academia, companies, so to get a good mix of perspectives when developing these standards. And you have, as a company, there are some basic requirements. There are 2 in numbers, so ESRS 1 and 2, some general requirements on how to report, and some general disclosure requirements, for example, describing your company structure, the sustainability governance system, etc., etc. So these general information, and then comes, I would say, the key approach with regard to the CSRD. It's the so-called double materiality analysis. It's a very straightforward objective. You are being asked to define your material topics, because you don't have to report on all, necessarily don't have to report on all topics listed here or topic clusters, but only those which are material from your company. And what material means, I will explain in one of the next slides. But it is important because it's some sort of a possibility for your company to focus at one hand, and on the other hand to really dig deep into those topics which are material or relevant. Always a given mandatory is the first topic under environment, climate change. That's something you always have to report on as a company, irrespective of the results of your double materiality analysis. But then others may apply, something like biodiversity and ecosystems, water and marine resources, resource use, circular economy, pollution on the environmental side, then social side, own workforce, affected communities, consumers, end users, workers in the value chain. Obviously, depending on the structure of the company, the level of internationality, and other, let's say, structural factors within your company, and then on governance, business conduct. So, and based on the materiality analysis, you choose, if you will, the topics, and then you report on these topics, and then you all put it all together. It's mainly for each topic, you always have to talk about what's your strategic approach. You see that on the right side. What are your objectives or targets, and what are your indicators? As I said, the indicators are also being defined within these ESRS standards, and then you talk about measures. So what do you do in order to improve your sustainability performance? And then it all goes into a report. Either it's self-standing, irrespective of that, you have to integrate it in your financial reporting. So that's basically, I would say, the operating model for the CSRD. And I'd like to briefly talk about the so-called double materiality, because for those companies who have dealt with sustainability reporting, they are surely familiar with the approach to materiality assessment, but you now have this double materiality that we experience in our work is actually a huge benefit for companies, because it really enables them to integrate sustainability in their I would say corporate strategy process, and also the way they operate and reflect what sustainability means. So you basically, how do you do it? It's obviously a simplified approach for the sake of this presentation here, but you start with an analysis of your company structure, and the value chain. So it's not only your own operations, but you also look into your value chain. Footnote here, this is one linkage to the LKSG, to the German supply chain law. You start with a topic long list, and then obviously the idea is that you shorten that list based on various, let's say, analytical layers or approaches. You can use obviously sectoral knowledge. You can use benchmark knowledge from your peer group in your sector. You can use databases. You can use ratings. In most cases, a lot of information is already available, so you surely will be able, irrespective if you're new to the topic or not, if you know where to look for, you will be able to come from a long list to a shorter list of topics. And then for this, you carry out the double materiality analysis. It does make sense to shorten the list in a first instance, because this double materiality analysis, it does take some time. I would say at least if you depending obviously on the company size, but if you involve internal colleagues or staff and carry out interviews and interact, I would say minimum 6 to 8 weeks, but obviously it's just a ballpark figure here. But it takes some time. That's the main message. And what you do is you identify impacts, but also risks and opportunities. The double in the double materiality comes from the two perspectives. So the traditional sustainability perspective, and that's also has been one criticism in the entire sustainability debate, was you basically only look from inside to outside. So you basically only look beforehand, what's the negative or positive impact of a company on the environment or humans, for example, CO2 emissions in the production process. That's the traditional sustainability view. And in many ways, it has led to a situation where sustainability was completely detached from any strategic conversation within the company or from management board discussions. What you have to do now is integrate this outside in view. So you have to actively think about what are developments, changes in my business environment that may affect my financial performance now or in the future. So for example, if you have production sites, let's say in Southeast Asia, and you see that the amount of physical climate risks increases, something you can read if you look at, I don't know, Munich Re insurance reports, then this may be a physical risk that has or may have an effect on your company performance. Just think about disruption of value chains or supply chains and the unavailability of certain materials, or you see some regulatory developments coming up. I talked about the European Green Deal and how does it affect my company. If you look at the automotive industry and the decision to phase out combustion engines, is it a threat? Is it a risk? Is it an opportunity? And this is something now that with this double materiality and the detailed view on sustainability topics, company can really actively reflect upon. So this is the double materiality, or doppelte Materialität for the German speaker. And then what you do with this information, and as I said, we have really we see positive feedback from companies. We support them with this double materiality. Is obviously it's a good foundation for a broader sustainability strategy or the incorporation of sustainability matters into a corporate strategy. It's either you're already engaged with external stakeholders or internal employees, but it definitely is also a good platform to expand this or start this exchange. It's a starting point for an extended data collection and data management. So you really, with this, you're able to broaden your view on how your company performs. You can integrate it into your risk management process, and also obviously this can translate into sustainability measures. For example, how do I decarbonize my production sites or my my value chain? Can I integrate some circular thinking into my my research and development process? Or how do I make sure that I tackle risks, human rights risks on my supplier, on the supplier side, for example, or I as a customer, how do I make sure that I actually meet my clients' demands with regard to sustainability, for example. So this is what the reporting looks like. There are also a few links and sources in this document, in the presentation. So on the left, this is just, and you may not be able to read it. The point is, for each of the standards, so emissions or climate change, pollution, circularity, own workforce, affected communities, workers in the value chain, you have a long list of subtopics and data points. So for example, what do you have to collect, what kind of data and report on? And this is just an excerpt of what is available online and being made available from the European Commission. Overall, we talk about, depending on how you count them, 1,100 to 1,200 data points. Obviously not all relevant for each company, but it gives you an idea of the, let's say, the dimension of the reporting. That's why the double materiality is also so important. If you do it right, you can really focus on what matters and you don't have to report on a gazillion of data points. So on the right, you see, I just copied into the slide an excerpt of the reporting requirements for the standard on the own workforce. And what is evident here is you see you have to report on various items, for example, number of employee turnover or description of methodologies and assumptions used to compile data. And what is interesting, and maybe here it's not so evident, but what is interesting is you have different, if you see on the columns on the right, data requirements and data type. You have different types of data requirements and data types. Sometimes you have, let's say, quantitative data where you have to give a percentage, for example, percentage of employee turnover. Sometimes it's what the European Commission or the ESRS standards call narrative. You have to describe something, for example, a process or an approach, and this is something to take into account when preparing also for this, for the CSRD reporting, that it's not only quantitative data, but it's also a mixture of quantitative and qualitative data. And sometimes, for example, obviously you don't have to write a long novel, but you just use a description you already have, for example, on a management system, or you just make reference to the description of a system, for example, environmental management system or something like that. But you should obviously make yourself familiar with it and think about these reporting requirements. So obviously this is just one approach, but this is how PARTSLIFE and we could support this. Obviously, with everything, what we don't do is, let's say, a standard solution, but we really look into what the company has already done and is able to do by itself, or where they need their support. What we normally do is we divide it into 3 phases. One is so-called CSR readiness. As I said, depending on where you are, maybe you've already written sustainability reports. We have clients who have done that. We have clients who don't. Then obviously you look what's already available, also what kind of policies are available. Maybe you have environmental statements that are available and can be used for a broader sustainability report. So we do that. We do a document-based assessment, and then we meet with you and discuss the results, and also discuss like what the company could contribute, where support is needed, and based on that we define an action plan. That's definitely better than, let's say, trying to give a one-size-fits-all solution. So to have an action plan where it's very clear what to do, when, and how. We have various companies who decide, okay, we want to have a dry run. So we want to have a sustainability report before we're actually legally obliged in 2026. So we want to do one now because it helps to identify data gaps. It helps to establish reporting processes within a company. It helps to motivate and activate colleagues you need in order to compile such a report. So many companies do that. And obviously, if we've done that, we start with the materiality analysis, the double materiality analysis based on how I've described it in the second phase. And the implementation, obviously, again, here, depending on where you are, normally involves data collection, different levels of engagement. Some companies say, okay, just give us templates, how to collect data, and we do it ourselves. Some others say, okay, please do the data collection because we don't know how to do it, or we don't have the time to do it. So both is possible on a broader spectrum. Depending on whether this is already needed or available, we could also look into, let's say, a more strategic approach to sustainability. Eventually, in your report, you will have to talk about, obviously, objectives and measures. So how do you want to proceed and move on with the sustainability? And you could also have let's say, a module where you already set up some sort of strategic objectives, or you revisit your existing strategy and align it to the materiality results. But it's not always necessary. You could also say, okay, I want to have a baseline report based on the materiality analysis, the data collection, and then setting up what is here under point 7, the data, the governance. So you basically review all relevant policies and guidelines. You see where still gaps, and then also you define responsibilities and set up the reporting process. And the sustainability strategy is then something separate, which you do after, and that's point 8, the report, that you have a first report. As I said, you could start with a dry run in 2024. It could be a standalone report, or you say, no, I'm already more advanced. Then obviously everything will be aimed at when your due date is. For example, financial year 2025, probably for some of you, in publication in 2026. If earlier, obviously you have to start more immediately. Nevertheless, our experience is companies, those who are due in 2026 for the reporting year 2025, have either started last year or start this year and have this dry run, some sort of dry run. Maybe it's not a full-fledged report, but some sort of data collection, because obviously with similar to other complex processes, there are many things to consider. Which kind of data is available? Does everybody use the same units? Does everybody understand what is meant when we say CO2 emissions? What is the scope of CO2 emissions to be reported on? Do we actually have information on our value chain? Do we have all necessary information on our own workforce, for example? Do we have reporting processes in place? Does everybody know what to do and how to support this? So there are many things to consider. Last slide here on the CSRD success factors. In our view, what do you need? As I said, process knowledge. You really need to understand what you need to do. Double materiality, for example, how to collect data, how to set up internal reporting structures, how to write a report. All this process knowledge is needed. It's good to have it. You need obviously competencies and abilities. Obviously, like many other processes, it starts from the top, so from the management and the buy-in, but obviously you need topic owners. That's really for us a key success factor. For example, you need to have colleagues who know how to deal with CO2 data, or with data in the supply chain, or with HR data. So you need to really define or address, identify topic owners, assign them, and maybe also train them. To do it, data availability and quality, obviously, I said, up to 1,200. It's the maximum number. There's no way all applied to your company, but nevertheless, it's way more than has been collected so far, if at all. And it's really a process we see that at least some companies underestimate, and it's something you should start right early. The European Commission has made everything available online. I've integrated the links, but so you can familiarize yourself with that. But it takes some time then, based on our experience, to really understand which data is available. Do I have it? Whom to ask? Who can report it? Where do I collect it? Do I have a software already set up to collect data? Do I need to buy it? Can I use or extend existing software, etc., etc.? So all these things. And also what I said at the beginning, there is a regulation. It will enter into force this year, but there is a phase-in approach, and the European Commission and, let's say, the bodies around the Commission, like EFRAG, They are publishing updates on a regular basis. And so, for example, in December last year, they have updated 3 super important guidance documents. They are not obligatory, but obviously when you eventually have to invite an auditor to audit the report, they will take it into account. One is on how to carry out the materiality assessment. One is how to address the value chain upstream and downstream, and also how to deal with these aforementioned ESRS data points. And obviously, PARTSLIFE and we could offer some support depending on where this is needed. We maybe one final remark. Obviously, we always look into the company first. What is really needed? Some just need some guidance. They have everything set up already. Some have nothing. They need to start from scratch. Then normally we also give, for example, some advice on the whole data collection, data management topic. So, for example, which kind of software is available on the market, which is more suitable. So I don't know, can you use your SAP solution, your IBM solution? Do you want to buy in a specific ESG software? I mean, on the latter, only almost every day a new ESG software pops up on the market, and we try to assess the suitability together with our clients and find the best solution. So much on the CSRD. I'd like to talk about the supply chain law now. I know it's a lot, but you can also maybe digest the information afterwards in the presentation. Why focus on the supply chain? Actually, there has been a long debate on let's say environmental and human rights impacts in the supply chain. This, for example, is a study we conducted. It's based on economic data, modeling data from 2017. That's basically the value chain modeled based on trade data of the automotive sector. And what you see is where do the biggest impacts occur with regard to greenhouse gases, air pollution, water consumption, and land use. And you see that in most cases, not in all, most cases, the impacts are not with the own production sites, but somewhere deeper in the supply chain, either on direct supplier levels, so could be companies like yours, or even further in the supply chain when it comes to, for example, resource extraction. So you see hotspots in the supply chain, and also if you look into the right, what's the distribution, for example, of greenhouse gas emissions in the German automotive value chain. So we talk a lot about climate here in Germany. Obviously, you see also a big chunk, 33%, that was 2017 in Germany, but you also see a coverage in other parts of the world. And if you add it up, obviously the majority of emissions is not being caused in Germany, but it's somewhere else in the international supply chain. That makes the supply chain view or value chain all the more important. Another angle I would say is, okay, you have international supply chain and you definitely have more media scrutiny on human rights and environmental matters. I just copied something out of the Financial Times. It's, I think, from last year in 2022. Automotive sector has been covered in the media, mainly with regard to China when it comes to forced labor. It's a super complex issue. It's by no means I put it here to present them as bad companies, but to say, okay, there are obviously discussions out there, media discussions, but also obviously on a policy and civil society level. On the right, you see it's not only a German topic or a European topic. If you look into the other side of the Atlantic to the United States, you also see that there is some policy scrutiny when it comes to supply chains in the automotive sector, for example. So it surely is an international topic. And in the same context, I would say, I cannot go into detail here, but obviously we talk about, if you see Germany, the German Supply Chain Act or Lieferkettensorgfaltspflichtengesetz, it is surely the most comprehensive and demanding one so far, I would say, but it's surely not the only one, and it's surely not the first one. You had other regulatory initiatives and laws being passed passed way earlier than that. For example, in the UK, United Kingdom, the Modern Slavery Act. Maybe for some of you, this is already a topic and you have to report on the Slavery Act. You had in France the first, I would say, comprehensive due diligence law, not as ambitious as the German one, but has been introduced way earlier in 2017. Loi de vigilance or duty of care law. And you have some other initiatives. What is important, I want to highlight that here briefly, is that on the European Union level, a similar law, similar to the German one, is currently being discussed and will be passed very soon. Maybe if you read the news these days, you've heard that the FDP is, let's say, opposing the current state of the so-called Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, saying it's imposing too many regulatory burdens on companies. I'm not evaluating that, but it is something that will eventually come, and it will be relevant, I would say, from 2027 onwards. And what is important to know here at this point is, so far it's more demanding than the German law, and it involves an even bigger scope than the German law, which will I explain in a minute. So companies from, depending on other criteria, but companies from 250 employees onwards will be covered most likely by the European law, and it will be relevant in a few years. 2027 is the first year it's most likely to become effective. So you see there is a bunch of legislation already available or coming up. You see the blue ones currently being discussed, and it's surely not going away, the topic of due diligence in the supply chain. So the German law, the LKSG, to whom does it apply? It is basically has entered into force last year, 2023, for those companies. And I see here I didn't translate it properly. Sorry about that. Companies with more than 3,000 employees in Germany, and since January 2024, so this year, companies with 1,000 employees in Germany, and also to certain foreign companies with a branch office in Germany, they have to have more than 1,000 employees. Branch office, I think there is a definition available from the German government. It means more than just operating and distributing goods. It entails more than that. Then as a foreign company, you also fall under this law. But it will be a lot of companies in Germany being directly affected here from this year, and also some last year. Then bottom left, what is the scope of the law? So it has a focus on own operations and direct suppliers. That's the key, let's say, scope of the law. Indirect suppliers have to be integrated in case of indications of human rights violations and environmental impacts. So indications, we cannot go into detail here, but it's not, let's say, it's not clearly defined what the threshold is. So what does it mean, an indication? Is it a civil society report? Is it something I've received directly with regard to my company? There are still some, let's say, some blurry lines between that to identify that. Nevertheless, what always applies, and I emphasize it here because I know that some companies tend to I don't want to say overperform, but like overperform in the context of the law, I would say. So there is a principle of appropriateness which applies. So it's totally acceptable based on a solid argumentation and an analysis that you address certain risks first and also implement certain measures, or don't implement certain measures. I mean, it is, for example, if we talk about forced labor in China, and you're an automotive supplier or automotive aftermarket company, my personal opinion would be, I don't see many ways how you could individually solve this issue. It doesn't mean you can't do anything, but you surely should reflect on what you can realistically do and what the best entry point is. Is it your own company? Is it maybe through the VDA? Is it another association? Is it a totally different approach? And this is something also that the German law takes into account. Not everybody seems to be aware of that. We see it on a consultancy and company level, but it's certainly something you can do. What are the obligations? So it has a clear focus on human rights. They're all listed in the law. For example, prohibition of forced labor, prohibition of child labor. And then you have two types of environmental risks. You have those linked to human rights. So there's I would say, a higher threshold. So for example, you have a production site near a lake or a direct supplier who has a production site near a lake, and this is contaminated for some reason. And in the German law, it becomes relevant if you can clearly link environmental harm to human rights risks or violations. For example, you have an affected community living in the vicinity of this lake, and there are some serious health damages. Then it is a topic for the law, and this is just the way the law defines it. It's one entry point. The other one is there are 3 international treaties which are being listed in the German law on mercury, on persistent organic pollutions, and on transboundary waste. I can also not go into details of these environmental obligations. They're quite complex because you always have to, let's say, also understand the treaty, but then also see it in the light of the German law and see what applies to you. It's not entirely clear, I would say, and there is also so far no guidance on that here in Germany on how to treat these environmental obligations. Who is monitoring compliance? I mean, first of all, yes, there is monitoring of compliance. It's the so-called BAFA here in Germany, the Federal Office for Economic Affairs and Export Control. And I mentioned at the beginning CSRD and LKSG, they both have reporting elements. For the LKSG, you have to submit a yearly report. The report format is available on the website of the BAFA. It's basically various questions, and then it's in some cases it's a tick box exercise or checkbox exercise, and some you have to write more in a narrative style, but you have to file a report on a yearly basis. And BAFA carries out some risk-based inspections. I know that because we as Fiont or Adelphi, we have supported BAFA in setting up the entire monitoring process in the past 2 years. In case of non-compliance, there are 2 pathways right now. One is fines up to 8 million and the exclusion from public contracts, which is a possibility. My general take at the moment, but of course that's something I can only say from my side, is that the BAFA is quite let's say they understand the challenges companies face when it comes to due diligence in the supply chain. A short excursion here to exposure of SMEs. So what if you don't fall directly under the law? Of course, there are no direct responsibilities for smaller companies. If you're not covered, you're not covered. That's basically very clear. Nevertheless, if you are a direct supplier, obviously you can expect maybe you're already expecting this, that companies affected by the law will reach out to you and engage with you. For example, change the contract and integrate some requirements that you have to, I don't know, carry out a risk analysis or have to sign a code of conduct or an extended code of conduct based on the new supply chain law requirements. But, and that's very important, these companies cannot just simply transfer their duties to you or a smaller SME. And that's also has been written down by the BAFA. There is a guidance document on that available online, so it cannot be transferred. You can also see it from another perspective. I would say 3 reasons. Obviously, if you have international supply chains, you have companies have themselves due diligence risks and opportunities, and of course, it can help them make their supply chains more resilient, which is obviously a term used quite frequently in the previous years, also linked to COVID and the interruption of supply chains. But there is obviously a case for that. And secondly, I mentioned that on my regulatory map. You can obviously anticipate upcoming EU regulation when the threshold in terms of whom applies it to is lower than the German law, to anticipate due diligence requirements and make yourself familiar with that. Quick view on the, let's say, the independent automotive aftermarket. I mean, you know it better than I do, obviously, but I would say if you look at the bottom box, there are certain parts in the sector with a higher risk profile. There's it's a given. If you look at platinum group metals, for example, if they're sourced from South Africa, which is a major country for that, it includes, for example, risk of water shortages. And as I said, if there is a linkage to human rights risks, it is a relevant topic in the context of the German law. Copper, it's a complex topic itself. For example, Peru, a main country for copper extraction and processing, there is a risk or a proven risk of discrimination against indigenous population. You can find many studies on that. If you look at rubber, for example, from Thailand, there is a risk of child labor. You can go on, there are various studies on that, and it just shows that we're not talking about theoretical, or maybe we talk about theoretical risks, but they can become quite relevant when you look through the lens of this law and if it matches with your own supply chain. What do you have to do with regard to the law? So as I said, it's more than reporting. Reporting is point 6, comes at the end. It's basically 6 main steps. You have to write a policy statement, so basically tone from the top saying, okay, we adhere to human rights standards, we follow them, we've integrated them into our company. It's basically a statement which maybe some of you know from environmental management systems, where you have a policy statement on environmental matters. Then you have an entire risk management process. So how do I effectively manage risks? Who should be involved? What's the process internally? What's the scope of my risk management, etc.? So you have to set it up. There are clear requirements in the law. Nevertheless, there's also much room for maneuvering, so that you can also adjust it to your needs. And then point 3 is the risk analysis. Basically 2 levels: abstract one based on sectoral risks and country-specific risks and raw material risks, if it applies. It surely applies in the automotive sector or aftermarket sector. And then a more individual risk analysis. And then based on that, you think about, okay, how can I prevent risks or remedy violations in case they have already happened? And then how do I make sure that I receive information on risks and maybe violations? That's why you set up a grievance mechanism. Of course, many companies have it, but our experience is you have to extend it, you have to make it more accessible, and there are certain criteria which have to be met by the law. And then, of course, at the end, it's reporting. It's a leaner reporting than in the CSRD. You can use some information, vice versa, but nevertheless, there is a reporting on a yearly basis. If you have to start this year, so a company with 1,000 or more employees, there are 2 things you have to do immediately, which is define responsible person within your company, a Menschenrechtsbeauftragter, human rights policy officer, and you have to set up the grievance mechanism. There are also certain guidelines we could make available to set up such a mechanism. I only have a few minutes, unfortunately. I just wanted to quickly go through, so how could you pragmatically address it? I would see 4 steps how to approach it if you've not already done so. First one is baseline assessment. So where do you stand similar to the CSRD? What have you done so far? What can be used? What's the entry point for the LKSG process? Then you define a roadmap, what to do when, as I said, certain things first, and then you can lay it out in a process, and then you implement, obviously, and then you report. What we normally advise is for certain elements, you should think about software support. We have 3 partners. I can also in the individual sessions explain a bit more on that. We have one, let's say, on very lean reporting. It's called Dato. We have a more comprehensive one for I would say medium-sized companies from Osapiens, and we have for those who maybe already work with IBM. We work with IBM. We have a partnership, and they are in VZ tool. 3 different tools, but nevertheless, in our view, software at one point or another has to be used to meet the criteria, especially when it comes to supplier management. What we also want to emphasize is there is existing knowledge. BAFA has made available knowledge on the law. There is, I would say, a plethora of documents available. Some of them you see here I've worked on personally. Monitoring reports on the state of due diligence in Germany, sectoral reports, especially on the automotive sector. And I have to rush through this a bit, unfortunately, but what we would then normally advise you to do is baseline assessment. We have a checklist and a scoring model that can be used. It's based on the criteria in the law. At the end, you get a scoring. You can see it on the right, a spider web, where you stand as a company. If you have done that, we specified the direction. So what should you do? Obviously, main goal is LKSG compliance. You could also, if you say, okay, eventually I want to go beyond it and maybe see it from a more like an opportunity side, how can I really shift my supply chain? How can I maybe also look at certain raw materials in a better way, like copper, for example, or others? How can I be a bit more ambitious? But then we lay out the action plan and create a roadmap. And we've done that for companies, so we know how to do it. Normally, at that point, yeah, we closely work with companies. We also try to see the synergies between different sustainability requirements. Then it comes to the implementation. It's basically what I've listed. So the key LKSG requirements, from risk management to grievance mechanism and reporting. We offer individual support. What I said, we offer software support. So we have partners we work with, Dato, for example, or Sapiens, IBM, or we help companies choose the right tool or integrate information into their tools. We carry out individual risk analysis. We help train suppliers. You see some pictures. That's in Pakistan, for example. We helped supplier understand the LKSG. On the left, you see graphic we did for a telecommunication company. We carried out an internal training. So there are various possibilities to do that, and how also you should view the LKSG approach. And then finally, there is a reporting element. As I said, it's BAFA has laid it out, or the German supply chain law made it very clear, but obviously you can also do it through a software we work with, or you can do it individually. Nevertheless, support is available on that. I rushed through this. Two final slides, success factors here. What is super important in our view? Firstly, understanding your value chain. Before you start anything, also, for example, before you start buying some software, really understand the size, the scope of your value chain and the potential impact. So if you have lots of suppliers, direct suppliers in Europe, you surely need a different system than a textile company with, let's say, the entire value chain being in Southeast Asia. It also defines on your operating model. Then you should think about, similar to the CSRD, set up cross-functional teams. Who do you need? HR internally for data. You need risk management. You need procurement. You can use environmental management colleagues, etc., etc. And also an advice that we see here, you should always think about a healthy mix between hands-on approach and software support. Where you can be pragmatic, be pragmatic. You don't need software for anything, but especially when it comes to, let's say, listing all suppliers. Some of you surely have more than, I don't know, 1,000, 2,000, integrate them into a software, carry out the risk analysis. This is where software definitely have their strengths, and where we also know how to use it for the law. CBAM I will skip for the time being. One last remark from my side. Sorry for rushing through a bit. It is a lot. What I would like to offer is, and maybe through Alexander, if you say, okay, that's interesting, I'd like to know more. We offer 30-minute slots. You can book, and I can talk with you individually about your CSRD or LKSG exposure. We have, let's say, some tools where we can assess your exposure or where you stand. And we could also talk about something called CBAM, if you haven't heard of it before. It's the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. It's something I know from Alexander is something very urgent in your sector, and we have, together with PARTSLIFE, we have a ready-made solution also together with a software partner. So feel free to book a 30-minute slot. I'd like to talk to you if you want to, and give you more, let's say, individual advice on how to approach it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Daniel, for giving us such a great overview. It was really, at least for me, a deep dive into each topic. I've learned a lot of things now. Maybe the guys from the IT who support us technically could unmute the microphones, that the attendants have the possibility to ask just one last question. because we are at the moment at the end, but we will take the possibility also to set up some meetings regarding this kind of topic for each company. We will inform you, everyone. At the end of the meeting, you will get an email from us with the slides you have seen from Daniel, and also a link where you can book appointments. Okay, if there are questions, just raise your hands. I've seen no question in the chat at the moment. Maybe just to have the bridge, if someone has the last question. Daniel, do you see any kind of sanctions if my company is not compliant regarding this kind of topics at the moment?
Yes, I mean, with regard to the LKSG, I mean, I already mentioned that there are sanctions, like you can be banned from public procurements for, I don't know if it's even relevant in this sector, or fines. Obviously, it will hurt you in one way or another if it's publicly or if it's public information that you've been fined. It's probably not good if you're a supplier of a larger, let's say, automotive company, or you have some sensitive clients. So I would be careful about that, but I would also say I don't want to present, let's say, a big Damocles Schwert in Germany that the BAFA is, I would say, round and about understands the challenges. That doesn't mean they don't monitor scrutinize thoroughly, but there are some, they understand the situation right now. So you shouldn't be scared or afraid, but you should be thorough with regard to that. And the CSRD, it's still in a debate where the sanctions are.
Okay, I understand. So I see there's no additional question from the attendants. I will close the topic for today. Thank you very much, especially to Daniel, for preparing everything. Very, very nice charts, good information. And also a big thanks to everybody who's attending in this meeting. I wish everyone a good day and hope to see you in the next meeting. Perfect. So bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.